Hey everyone, it is Julie here with Tip Ranks, and once again, I have the pleasure of being joined by Norma Chu, the founder of DDC. Norma, welcome. Thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Thanks for having me, Julie.
Of course. Now, for those that don't know, DDC is a global Asian food platform. But in recent years, DDC has pioneered an innovative dual strategy, combining your core food business with a bold corporate Bitcoin treasury approach. So I'm excited to continue our discussion today about this Bitcoin treasury strategy, some different milestones you guys have reached. So diving right in this past year, we have seen a big wave of digital asset treasuries or DATs hit a more challenging market. So, what did the execution phase of your strategy teach you that your launch phase did not?
Well, I think, I'll start from, what we've been doing recently, Julie. We've been staying active despite the recent pullback in Bitcoin pricing. Since entering, 2026, our Bitcoin holdings is now up 85%. So we went from, ending 2025, which is really the year one of the Bitcoin treasury for us, at 1,183 Bitcoin, to now we hold 2,183 Bitcoins. So what we have been taking advantage of really is the pullback in the market that allow us to, buy Bitcoin at a lower cost. But I
Mhm.
think, taking a step back through the execution phase, what we want to really show and kind of demonstrate and build that track record with our shareholders is that DDC's Bitcoin accumulation strategy has been built with a long-term horizon in mind with it from the very beginning. So, we aren't really timing the market or definitely not making quick short-term decisions based on any kind of short-term volatility or Bitcoin price predictions. We have an execution framework in place that is based on the long-term view that Bitcoin is an appreciating asset, and that it will add value to our shareholder. And it is in our shareholders' interest that we continue to grow that Bitcoin treasury over time. I think this is really important and something that I try to emphasize and kind of repeat because it is impossible to time the market. I think we all want to be smart, but it's hard to think that we're smart enough to, always buy in the bottom and only sell at the peak. So I think these recent, Bitcoin purchases align with that long-term vision. Of course, the recent Bitcoin price pullback gives us, a lower entry price point, which we're happy about. And we would expect to continue to keep accumulating Bitcoin throughout different cycles. So I think, bottom line is these aren't just, short-term trades. These are steps that we've really taken to own more Bitcoin and we want to continue to own more Bitcoin in a meaningful way over the long term.
Now, markets still tend to lump all DATs together and look at one metric, which is that MNAV. Now, for our listeners, what are some other things, a few other things that they should be comparing between treasury companies instead?
I think Bitcoin per share is a good metrics to look at. And of course, MNAV is kind of maybe useful also from a valuation standpoint to see whether there are any DATs that are trading, extremely below their net asset value. But I think because the industry is still so young, it's still relatively hard for retail investor at a glance to get a very, I would say, uniform read on all these metrics, may it be Bitcoin per share or MNAV. For us in the management team at DDC, we do want to continue to grow our Bitcoin yield over time. And I think this metric is helpful for us to kind of gauge our ability to increase value for our shareholder. Um, but I think if, going forward as investors become more sophisticated and also the DAT industry continue to grow and evolve, I think gauging management's ability to kind of access and source Bitcoin is a skill set that probably sets different management team one from another, and also management's ability to kind of accumulate Bitcoin through different cycles is also another thing to kind of track and really monitor which management team you want to back, right? So I think other than your purely financial metrics, I think investors will become more sophisticated in terms of monitoring and kind of tracking the track record for different management teams. So I think over the long term, investors will also look at how effective management will be in creating value with their Bitcoin holdings, in the process of differentiating treasury companies and their strategies.
Yeah. And in the last 12 to 18 months, DDC has gone from like zero Bitcoin to I think you just mentioned over 2,000 while still running a growing operating business. So, what does moving at crypto speed look like behind the scenes?
As a founder and CEO, um, we've always been, oh, I've always been like a very execution focused, and we always want to be moving forward, right? Because if you're not moving forward, you're definitely falling behind, especially nowadays in this environment. But I think I enjoy the Bitcoin speed or the crypto speed because running a growing food business in mainland China market or in Asia is also very competitive, and everything's also, extremely moving extremely fast. So I don't think that for us it's very different now that we are in, crypto and also in Bitcoin. So yeah, for me, I think I find it fairly natural to be operating in the current speed.
Yeah, we're just used to that speed. Hey, full steam ahead.
That's right.
Now, for our listeners there who are maybe crypto native and stock curious, how would you explain DDC as like a tool in their portfolio rather than just another ticker?
I think it's a great way to own Bitcoin exposure that gives you additional leverage. At the same time, there is an growing profitable underlying business in DDs at DDC. I think that actually is one of our key differentiator when you are evaluating whether you want to add DAT exposure to your portfolio. A lot of that's out there, they may not have a growing underlying business. And I think that's majority of the time. And for DDC, because we do have an operating business and the management team, including myself, has been with the company for me since day one, for a lot of the executive management team for multiple years. There's continuity and also established culture in the operating business. And I think, that sets, DDC apart from any other data out there that you can add to your portfolio.
Nice. And then last time you were on, you guys were talking about some targets for your Bitcoin accumulation and becoming a top three treasury holder. So, what are the key milestones that investors should be tracking over the next 1 to 2 years?
I think getting scale is definitely really important for all dads out there. And prior year we were very ambitious in terms of reaching the 10,000 Bitcoin goal. But we at the same time, I think it's important to stay nimble and also kind of iterate the goals depending on how the macro environment unfolds. And so last year, entering into 2026, one of our advisor, which he owns and run a research firm that focus only on Bitcoin and crypto, have given us, a fairly extensive outlook in terms of his view on Bitcoin 2026, which, made us to have this, in hindsight, now very correct and smart decision to raise funds in the fourth quarter of last year, but not deploy it right away. So we enter this year with more chess pieces, in hand that we can deploy as we see potential, weaknesses in Bitcoin pricing. And so I think, going forward, we will continue to have a fairly, ambitious goal for our Bitcoin stack, but, we will do it, I think consistently. Like so far in 2026, we have been acquiring Bitcoin every single week, for the eighth consecutive week now. And so I think investors should look at, whether DDC is continuing its course in terms of growing our Bitcoin stack, and also, whether we are able to kind of accumulate this asset at a lower and lower or at a fairly attractive entry point. Right now, I think our average price is somewhere around 83 to 84,000 per Bitcoin. I know it's still higher than the current market price, but we're probably the second lowest in terms of entry cost so far, right after strategy. So I think that will be another important kind of milestone for investors to track as well.
Absolutely. And then to wrap it up, I kind of have a two-part question here. So for listeners that are maybe new to DDC and are hearing about it for the first time, how do you usually describe the company in one sentence? And then how do you explain the Bitcoin strategy who's someone that's new to crypto?
Um, Well, I always describe DDC or introduce myself, and so what we do is we're in food and Bitcoin. I think it's a great conversation starter whenever I find myself as in business or social events. DDC, we are a growing and profitable food business, but also have recently adopted the Bitcoin Treasury Strategy since 2025. So that will be how I describe it in one sentence. In terms of how I would, describe Bitcoin to someone who might be new to DDC or new to crypto, I think, for a lot of us that hold fiat currency are exposed to, currency debasement and also inflationary pressure. Basically, all the dollar and all the cash that we hold, we can buy less things with it over time, and that kind of, I guess, value erosion doesn't come overnight, but it's definitely happening every day and is happening quietly. So I think for individuals or corporations that want to kind of defend themselves, whether through, to defend themselves in terms of the money that they earn, through the time they spend on working, or like us running a company, it's so hard to, defend our margins and build a profitable business. If we want to have that defensive mechanism on our balance sheet to kind of keep the money that we make and also hopefully grow the treasury that we have on our balance sheet, Bitcoin is the best asset class to add to your balance sheet. 21 million cap, I think the scarcity is the most important characteristics for someone to really get to understand and learn about Bitcoin in the beginning, because I think that in itself just sets it apart from all the other asset class out there.
All right. Perfect. Well, I appreciate your insights today, Norma. It's very interesting, and it'll be exciting to see how DDC continues to evolve in this Bitcoin digital strategy here. Thanks so much for joining us, and I hope we get to chat again sometime soon.
Great. Thanks for having me again, Julie.
Of course. Thank you.